While officials in Brussels are warning the government needs to make concessions to its Brexit bill if it's going to guarantee the start of trade talks next month. A couple of people to talk to about this. Jonathan Liss is Deputy Director of British Influence. Now, that's a pro-single market think tank, very much on the Remain side of the argument. He's been to Brussels recently. Richard Tice is a businessman and chair of the group Leave Means Leave. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Both sitting together in our London studio. Good morning, both of you.
Morning.
Good morning.
Jonathan, I know you've been to Brussels recently and had various meetings there and have gleaned some information about where we are with the whole Brexit negotiation at the moment. What can you tell us?
The situation at the moment looks pretty bleak. Officials are saying that if the government stays where it is, then there'll be no talks in December or March or indeed ever, because the government has to face its commitments. If it leaves the EU with what it sees as a gaping hole in its budget, then there'll be no deal. And no deal really does mean no deal, just like leave means leave. So when David Davis says that no deal can mean we have a deal on aviation, for example, the EU says no. No deal means just that. You have to, every single part of a deal has to be approved by the European Parliament. It can't be negotiated at the last minute. And if there are no financial commitments forthcoming, that means there's no vote either. So the ambition was that trade talks would start in December. What you're saying is you're not getting that sense from people you're speaking to in Brussels. That's right. There's a sense that the Prime Minister's been backtracking since the Florence speech, which was positive in itself. But since then, ministers have been giving different signals. There are some signals that the British government has been backtracking on citizens' rights guarantees, which is worrying. As I say, May doesn't think that she can go further on financial commitments, but the EU leaders are saying, well, they can't go further than they did in October. So we're at a stage of a kind of an impasse. Richard Tice, this is worrying, isn't it, given that if we don't start trade talks in December, the next opportunity, I think, is March, and suddenly the window for negotiating an effective working relationship with the rest of Europe becomes much, much smaller, much more challenging.
Well, I mean, the reality is that, Brussels would say that, wouldn't they? That's part of the negotiating process. But what the British government must clearly set out is we're not going to negotiate against ourselves. We've made a very generous offer in the Prime Minister's Florence speech, and it's actually now for the EU to respond to it. And the truth is, if they don't want to start serious trade talks in December, then actually there's an advantage for that, because we then get the clarity that actually they really don't want to do a deal. They want to trap us into a really, really bad deal. And then the government should say, right, that's it. If we haven't got serious progress by the end of March, that's absolutely fine. We're going to the base case, which is a different type of deal. It's not no deal at all. You revert to what's called WTO rules, which is the basic trading platform that all global nations operate under. And that's fine. And we spend a year organising the various agreements and technicalities to do that. That's what countries like America, like Canada, Australia and others use. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for us. But we have to confirm that we're going in that direction sooner rather than later. Right, OK, so clarity is there. How bad would that be as far as you're concerned, Jonathan? That is a total disaster. To be clear, if a no deal means instantly tariffs, a hard Irish border, a plunging pound, a lorry parks in Dover, and that's not all. And that's such scaremongering nonsense. Not scaremongering. It's Project Fear around 5 or 6. We've lost count. It is not scaremongering, because basically it's very clear legally. If you have no deal, that means you are outside every EU treaty, body, and law. That means so we deposit our schedule of commitments with the WTO. All these matters go to the WTO. We organise the various agreements, and that's what we need to spend the last year organising. Richard, can WTO give you aviation rights? Because aviation depends on single European sky, the European Court of Justice. If you are outside of the EU with a no-deal scenario, you literally cannot fly a plane between London and that is such nonsense. It's not nonsense. It is, and people like Willie Walsh have confirmed that it's nonsense. The government has confirmed it's nonsense. It's this sort of scaremongering that is actually damaging morale when the country needs to be coming together and drawing confidence from the huge Brexit opportunities. Well, you say the country needs to be coming together. There is a bit of an issue with the government coming together and the weakness within Theresa May's cabinet at the moment, the difficulties she has with her Foreign Secretary, the International Development Secretary, questions over her Deputy Prime Minister, in effect, the First Secretary, and, of course, the loss of Sir Michael Fallon as well. She is not at her strongest
in order to go in.
Correct. That's absolutely right, Rachel.
And it would appear that officials in Brussels are well aware of that.
They are.
Sure, but the reality is what is needed is leadership. And the reason that, people feel that we're in a bit of a pickle at the moment, frankly, is because there's not strong enough leadership from the government ministers to make it absolutely clear that if we haven't made progress by X date, then we're going to revert to the alternative base case scenario. At the moment, it's left too much in the air, and because the government hasn't published the WTO plans, how it would work, people don't have the confidence as to how it would work, and that is leading to slipping morale. And that's why the government's got to get on with it, publish these plans and say, this is where we're going to, and if we haven't achieved something by X date, we believe the latest end of March, then we move to WTO. That's a different type of deal, but it's perfectly acceptable as a base case.
Jonathan, can I ask you about this suggestion that we are happier people now since the referendum? Whitehall statisticians said yesterday they'd recorded a material rise in 3 measures they used to track personal well-being in their first set of full-year figures since the referendum. We are not merely happier, we're more satisfied with life, and we are more likely to feel that what we do is worthwhile. The only blip in the data is apparently in measures of anxiety, which have crept up now. How all those things can be present at the same time, I'm not entirely sure. But what does that tell us, do you think, about the way we're approaching our future as a nation?
Obviously, it's nice that people are feeling comfortable about the future. I think, if I understood the reports, it's more England that's feeling upbeat. And England, outside London, was also the region that voted most strongly for Brexit. So maybe other voters are feeling slightly less sort of upbeat about the future. But of course, Brexit hasn't happened yet. Even though the growth is still flatlining, we have high employment, for example, things aren't going badly. If we have a no-deal scenario, and even if we have a bad deal, so to speak, but if we have a no-deal scenario, that changes overnight. And I just have to come back to what Richard was saying, because the WTO is not going to solve our problems. And you have slipping morale, but it's much worse of the no-deal scenario when you have a country on its knees. And there are certain things that Brexit simply can't answer. So the WTO issue cannot solve aviation. The British Airline Pilots Association have confirmed what I said. There's no aviation. Okay. And the other thing is about radiotherapy. No one's talking about radiotherapy. If you're outside your atom, which is a nuclear agency, then radiotherapy is severely curtailed because radioisotopes may not be able to come at the level they are.
A very quick final thought from Richard Tice. How's your well-being at the moment?
Mine's fantastic, and the good news is for listeners, it's all thanks to Brexit, not despite Brexit.
Thank you very much.